So thank you, by the way, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you are now the mayor of Hoboken, but I kind of want to start in the beginning. I want to get your origin story. You grew up at a very different time in the United States today, even though we have, high levels of intolerance and, quite frankly, racism that's creeped up in the last few years. The environment's still, on a cultural level, a lot better than it was when you were growing up. What was it like growing up? Were you bullied? Was it difficult? Or,
First, I just want to thank you for having me on your podcast and speaking to these issues that we'll have a chance to discuss further. I was born here in the U.S., in the United States, the son of immigrants who came to the U.S. from India in the 60s. So you are correct in the sense that we are in a different climate than we were when I was growing up in the 70s as a young boy, a young Sikh boy in the United States. It was similar in the sense that that the challenges of school bullying and discrimination were present back then, and they're also present now. I believe back then it was based upon more of a lack of education or understanding of who Sikhs are. Unfortunately, over the course of time, that's been compounded by a variety of former political events through the decades that have resulted in negative stereotypes about people who are either Sikhs or wear the star in their...
Yeah. Well, were you personally, did you personally have a lot of impact, or was it?
Yes, I grew up I went through the New Jersey public school system, and I was the probably the only person of color in my grade school. So I was called the N-word on a routine basis.
Oh, wow.
I was my jura, or my hair was constantly touched. I was physically assaulted. I was called names on a regular basis, disparaging names. Just the kind of the picking on you because you look different. And fortunately, I had parents who told me that when that happens to you, stand up, be proud of yourself, be proud of who you are. We had one ground rule. The standing rule was always report bullying to your teachers and the school administrators. But the one ground rule my mother always told me is that if somebody touches your hair, you have the right to physically push back. So there was one instance where my mother was brought into school and told that your son was engaged in a physical altercation with another child, and she explained that I've given my son permission to defend himself if his articles of faith are under assault. Defense of our articles of faith is something that was instilled in me in this context at a very young age.
But look at you now. Now you run the city. I went from that to running the city. So, on the topic of your parents, how does your parents immigrate here? Because usually people have very interesting immigration stories, and there's so many different reasons how people came to the United States.
Yeah, so my father came here in the 60s after doing a PhD in, I believe, chemical engineering, and then he completed a PhD at Penn State University in Pennsylvania in physics.
Oh, wow. So he's a smart guy.
Hopefully the genes, I'm not sure if they passed down or not.
I think you're good.
But he's got a specialty in that area. But one story that he tells me, which I'll never forget, is that his first day in the U.S., he landed at Kennedy Airport and was picked up by another student to be driven to the campus at Penn State University. And as they were arriving at the university campus, the individual said, we need to make one stop. And he said, where do we need to go? And he said, we need to go to the barber shop so you remove your turban and or remove your hair to make sure that you integrate and you blend in with the rest of the students. And that's not the America that my father envisioned coming to.
Right.
He envisioned an America where his religion and his religious rights would be respected,
right?
And that there would not be a necessity to make a choice between your religion and your ability to succeed.
Right.
So he chose not to sacrifice his articles of faith.
Right.
I think that decision was very impactful for both my brother as well as myself.
Right. And what's interesting, I think, for listeners that don't know, what the turban represents is a commitment to stand up for equality and tolerance and fight against injustice for all people, which are values that are correct, so core to who we are as Americans. So it's for our community making that decision is we came to America to experience those values, and we wear the turban to represent those values. And in some ways, we're asked to remove one to experience the other. Right.
Which is rather ironic because, there's a very symbiotic relationship between being a Sikh and being an American.
Right.
The values that Guru Nanak espoused, freedom of religion, gender equality,
right. Racial equality.
These are all values and principles that are enshrined in the founding documents of this country.
Right.
The major difference is that the Sikh gurus espoused them centuries before the founding fathers espoused them.
Right.
The Guru Nanak was very, very progressive.
Even by today's standards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even though equality is enshrined in our founding documents, it did not include African Americans. It did not include women up until the last
very
century.
Recently,
Yet, in Sikhi, those values were enshrined from the inception.
Right. One thing I want to tell you about, and I just want to ask you about. So, I wanted to ask you about your relationship with Gabir and Amr. And the reason why I ask is, so our last podcast was with Dr. Marwa. So Dr. Marwa was the first campaign manager for the first Sikh congressman, Dalip Singh Song. And interestingly, Dalip Singh Song, Dr. Marwa, and why is his name escaping me? Bhagat Singh Thind.
Yes.
Bhagat Singh Thind, who fought in World War I and had his case went all the way to the Supreme Court. All three of them lived right next to each other, which is wild because when I think of Bhagat Singh Thind, I think of a World War I picture. I think he's gone by the time the 50s happened, right? But he's an older gentleman. They all lived next to each other. They were all friends, and commiserated over passing the Immigration Act that Johnson passed. That is the reason why a lot of us are here.
Right.
Which is wild because those three people, Sikh men really had, by scheming and plotting and playing politics and working their different angles, were able to usher in this new wave of immigration. I don't think anyone knows that story, but when there was an article about you your brother and Gurbir in the New York Times, right? Very few friendships are profiled in the New York Times. And when I read that article, I immediately thought of those three.
Oh.
Because you're now the mayor of Hoboken, Gurbir is the Attorney General of New Jersey, and your brother founded the largest Sikh organization in the United States. And it was kind of this like history rhyming.
Sure.
Decades later.
I
don't even know if you know that. Yeah.
No, I wasn't aware of that, but it also reminds me of a couple things. Is that there are multiple ways to achieve the objective of social justice.
Right.
Not everyone needs to be a mayor or run for elected office. You can do it as a federal prosecutor or an attorney general. You can do it through nonprofit advocacy organizations. You can do it by serving in the judiciary. You can do it through law enforcement. Or you can just be an activist in an area that you care about.
Right.
So when you look at Bhagat Singh Thind, Dr. Marwa, and Congressman Sound, those are three different. They took three different approaches.
Right.
You also look at the civil rights era, and you see, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Taking an approach towards racial justice. At the same time, Malcolm X taking an approach towards racial justice through different means, and Thurgood Marshall at the same time as an advocate in the courts, all in the same general era. Three men who had overarching objectives that were similar, but took different roadmaps to navigate those needs or those objectives.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I don't know. I just thought that was cool. Yeah. Who did you look up to when you were growing up?
I looked up to my mother.
Yeah.
And my parents.
Yeah.
They instilled very basic values. I obviously looked up to, sports players, whether it was Michael Jordan or Reggie Jackson.
You didn't have any New Jersey? Are you a Giants fan?
I'm actually a Pittsburgh Steelers fan.
Steelers fan? I'm a Browns fan.
I
think the interview is over.
You must be a Cowboys fan.
No. I'm a Browns fan. I'm Cleveland Browns.
Okay.
Yeah. You just got Odell Beckham. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. After Franco Harris came to he came to the Steelers right after Penn State, where my father studied. Yeah. So my father was a Penn State fan, and
got it.
A Steelers fan when they were winning Super Bowl after Super Bowl.
Yeah.
When I was about 7 or 8 years old. So that's never left our blood.
Yeah.
So I looked up to your average sports players.
Yeah.
On another level, just learning about Sikh history and some of the heroes of Sikh history as well.
Right. The reason why I asked that question is because when you were growing up, and even when I was growing up, there wasn't that many minorities on the scene that you could look up to, and it was strange. And I know the first person I really latched onto was Barack Obama. But we can get into that later. How did you decide to get into public service and politics then?
I had a general interest in public service and politics as an observant, meaning somebody who would keep track of what's happening. That really originated from my family dinner table conversations that my brother and my parents would have about topics of the day or the politics of the day, and that really instilled a heightened interest in government politics just growing up. I decided to make that leap of faith and decided to actually run for office, primarily because of two reasons. One is because partially because of President Obama. I was a avid and still am an avid supporter.
Yep, me too.
Of Senator Cory Booker.
Oh, me too. Same. Okay, doesn't change.
I've known Senator Booker since he was a councilman.
Yep.
And volunteered for his elections for mayor and for Senate and now for president. But when Senator Booker decided to support then Senator Obama, I made that decision as well. And after he won the Iowa caucus, I closed my law firm for a week and traveled up to New Hampshire with my brother and started knocking on doors. And then my wife and I knocked on doors for Senator Obama with our two-year-old daughter in Pennsylvania a few days before the election. So when he won, I felt if America was ready for a black president, they certainly should be ready for a Sikh councilman.
Right, for sure.
For city council. The other reason was purely pragmatic. Hoboken government was a hot mess at the time. There's rampant corruption, patronage, ineptitude, which resulted in a state takeover of our finances, taxes rising by 47%. And people fleeing from the suburbs. And my wife and I were in our early 30s, and there was a desire for change, and we decided to, as President Obama said, grab a clipboard, roll up our sleeves, get off the sidelines, and run for office.
Yeah, man, it was a different time. It was a hopeful time. I don't know if the younger guys quite. How old are you, Gareth? 29. Okay, word. Okay, he gets it. He was around. So yeah, it was. If you're like, I think if you're like of a certain younger age, like the kid, early 20s, it was such a unique thing to have him to come up on the world stage, Obama.
It was. I supported him out of a relationship with Senator Booker, but out of full candor, not with a high degree of confidence in his ability to succeed.
Right, just because based off what you've seen. Yeah.
But almost out of a feeling that his policies were in line with mine, and I should support candidates who I believe in. But when he was successful in Iowa, it really gave me hope that perhaps this country is, or at least partially going into a post-racial era where people are starting to judge you based upon your ability to deliver on substantive issues, not the color of your skin or your gender. Right,
absolutely. How did your Sikh values affect your decision to go into public service?
I think Sikhism, the three main tenets of Sikhism, believing in our Creator, working hard, and charity is the third one. Charity is really, I believe, seeing the connection between yourself and society, meaning not just the Sikh community, but a community as a whole. The person who lives down the block from you, your neighbor, your community. Hoboken happens to be my community. So I think Sikhism taught me that you do not aspire towards wealth and prosperity simply for the benefit of your immediate blood relatives, but you see all of humanity as your family, and that is very similar to the idea of public service and seeing that connection between your success and the success of society in general, and your obligation as a Sikh to uplift others who might need a helping hand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know we were talking about President Obama earlier, but what was it like to run for public office and look so radically different than the average American? Because I know Obama created the atmosphere, but even then, when you were running the first time and even the second time, the looked different. You know what I mean?
Right. Look, just like President Obama, I did not run as the Sikh candidate. I ran as the candidate who happened to be a Sikh.
Right.
Hoboken does not have like a 90% Sikh population where I can get the Sikh vote, so to speak.
Right.
Because there is no Sikh vote other than myself and my brother and a handful of
Yeah.
So that
got that one locked down. You got that one.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But that wouldn't get you very far.
Yeah.
You need a bit more, and the conventional wisdom when I first decided to run for office were questions were being asked of me by political experts.
Right.
How many Sikhs live in Hoboken? And the answer was not many. How many Indians live in Hoboken? The answer is not many. How many Asians live in Hoboken? It's about 2%. So I was told that you're not Latino, you're not Irish, you're not Italian, you don't belong to a labor union. Where's your base? Who's going to vote for you?
Right.
One person said that you wear a turban beard that will not go unnoticed in this election, and that was not meant as a compliment.
Right.
So that really raised the question as to whether or not being a Sikh would be an asset or a liability to my ability to serve my community in an elected capacity.
Right.
So my reaction to it is the second tenet of Sikhism is hard work. Working with your hands. Being at that bus station, that train station at 6 o'clock every morning, knocking on doors, on a daily basis, really connecting with people, having conversations with people, and proving to people that you're the most qualified candidate on the merits.
Right.
So back in 2009, as a first-time candidate, out of 12 candidates running for office, I received the highest number of votes.
Wow, that's impressive.
So I think that speaks really to Hoboken.
Yeah, running in a primary like that, particularly at a city council race and getting all the votes, is really hard.
Yes, it is not easy. Nothing was handed to me in politics.
You got to hustle. I want to make that clear to the people that are listening.
Yes, power is not given; it's earned.
Yeah,
and sometimes it has to be taken.
Yeah,
nothing in my political life has been given to me. I have never been anointed to anything. Everything that I'm proud to say that sitting here as mayor is something that I was able to do through a tremendous amount of hard work.
Right. So, what was the message then that resonated? Because clearly, hustling is a key part of this, but once you knock on the door, people have to be receptive to what you're saying in order for that hard work to actually work. Right. What do you think it is about your message when you're running for city council or as mayor that resonated with so many people?
I think people, they want to align with you on the issues, but I think, actual human contact is critical to making people understand and look past the turban and beard and to say, hey, this guy is not that much different than me.
Right.
He was. One thing that really helped me when I was first running were the debates because they were televised and everyone who was voting were watching these televised debates. They said, "Wow, he doesn't speak with an accent, even though he looks like he might speak when he speaks." He's got a Jersey accent, and he's an attorney, and it appears that he's fairly persuasive.
Yep.
Yeah.
So then you just become a normal guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the after those debates, people would stop me in the street and would say, we saw the debates, and you're clearly the most qualified candidate. So it's a matter of breaking past maybe presumptions that people have about you based upon appearance, and breaking those barriers. It takes time and hard work, but I think the lesson is that if you put in that hard work, you can do it.
Yeah, totally. You know what's interesting? I don't think I actually ever told this story, but we did a lot of focus groups to develop the message for We Are Sikhs, and we would actually ask people after showing them pictures of different Sikhs if you would vote for them. This is like, I think you had not run at this point. It was way before, actually, years before. And we asked, and we showed them pictures of Sikhs, and ones that were like very well polished, just had because all they had to go off as a picture.
Right.
These people that looked really well polished and like looked professional or had a professional look to them. People were quite actually willing to vote for a Sikh, even though we looked different. It was just like unique insight that like. It's like not as much of a barrier as we think.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Interesting.
And I think obviously, you're a testament to that. So I want to get into the issues really quick. Where are we on time?
It is 11:40.
11:40. Okay, I'm going to rush through these so we have enough time to get to the cool, more spicy questions at the end. So you just recently announced a pretty major initiative on climate change for Hoboken, the Climate Action Plan. Do you want to kind of talk through that?
We the decision of the U.S. government to pull out of the Paris Agreement really makes it incumbent upon mayors and the states to pick up where the federal government has left off. And I feel that in Hoboken, we need to do our fair share to make sure that we are a sustainable and resilient city and help combat climate change and not contribute to it. So one of those measures was a commitment to purchase all energy for municipal facilities through purely renewable sources, through like wind and solar, instead of the use of fossil fuels, which contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, which have negative impact on climate change. So there's the rollout of that, and then Hoboken is the first city in New Jersey to make that commitment to go to 100% renewable energy for its municipal facilities.
Oh, wow.
Right now we're at 18%. We're jumping from 18% to 100%.
Oh, excellent.
As of April, which is a major milestone in terms of advancing these issues.
So the reason I asked this question is because as mayor, there's a number of very immediate things that you have to deal with: infrastructure, education, jobs. Why did you feel compelled to do this? And what would you expect to happen if you didn't take the action that you did?
Well, the reason I felt compelled to focus on the environment, notwithstanding the fact that we are focusing very heavily on infrastructure, as well as fiscal policies, quality of life issues, and other matters. Superstorm Sandy had an incredible impact on Hoboken. We're a coastal community. We're below sea level. So climate change has a much more acute impact on Hoboken. 80% of Hoboken was underwater during Superstorm Sandy.
Wow.
500 million gallons of water came into the city. We became a bathtub from the north and the west. Ensuring that we have a climate action plan to make Hoboken resilient and sustainable for the future is something that we have no choice but to address.
Completely agree. So climate change is kind of like a little pet policy issue of mine. Just to reinforce the points that you're making, I think for a lot of people, I'm just saying this for our audience, and this has nothing to do with Sikhism, but I still think it's really important, is I don't think people quite realize that climate change means more than just sea levels rising or just like kind of like bad weather. It's the impact of climate change over the next 30 or 40 years will be biblical.
Absolutely.
It will be a complete rethink of our society. And it will impact every single way that we live, from our politics to entertainment to things that, because we're I think as humans, we sometimes think we're immune from nature, but we're not. And I think Superstorm Sandy is the perfect example of that. No matter how rich you are, the earth doesn't care about how much money you have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
And I guess the last point I'll make on this is that I think we have a moral. I think leaders like you, I think, and you clearly have already done it, have a moral obligation to make sure that we deal with this issue. Because if you think our politics are destabilized now, imagine when there's hundreds of millions of refugees around the world, and only 1 million refugees in Syria to completely destabilize Europe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
You know, one of the first, well, actually, the first act in office when I took the oath of office was to come to my office and sign an executive order declaring Hoboken a fair and welcoming city.
Yep.
It's commonly known as a so-called sanctuary city, but
Right.
essentially what it means, in addition to affirming our American values of equality for all, is that we will not cooperate with federal law enforcement in the enforcement of federal civil immigration policies. People will be treated with equal rights,
Right.
irrespective of your immigration status in Hoboken. I thought that was a very important message to send in this national climate as a first act in office.
Yep.
It's also something that is perfectly in line with my values as a Sikh, that we should treat everybody with respect and equality, no matter their immigration status.
Right. No, totally. I was just going to actually ask you about that. I mean, from that model, how do you think other communities can replicate it? Because it feels like so many of our communities and just our politics nationally is so divided on race and religion and even what it means to be an American. And I think that, like you said earlier, it's really now incumbent on leaders, city leaders, state leaders, to take up that mantle. What would you recommend to your peers that are leading cities on this issue?
A lot of the presidential candidates and at least on the Democratic side are starting or saying that we need to have a more national conversation about race and racial justice, about reparations for the African American community, and really come to grips with the fact that racial justice or lack thereof is an ongoing problem that stems from the days of slavery, and that notwithstanding many efforts by generations of leaders to correct our original sins as a country, the impacts of that time period are still felt by minorities today.
Right.
Whether you look at the partnership levels of African Americans at a law firm or any other sector, the disparities, the disproportionalities are still there,
right,
and need to be addressed.
And just even to tie that back into climate change, right? Like, in order for us to be able to deal with quite literally global problems at that scale, we have to have a cohesiveness within our own communities so that our politics can produce solutions to those problems, nationally, internationally. And if we're so bogged down on almost superficial issues at the point of just making sure we respect people that look different, that we can't tackle these global security threats, I think our children, our grandchildren are going to look at us like we were foolish.
Absolutely, yeah. All of these issues to some degree are interconnected, and we really need to break barriers.
Right.
We have the Sikh community, but the Sikh community is operating in a larger community within U.S. society.
Yep.
And what impacts the Muslim community or the Asian community or the African American or Latino community, we should pay attention to, and where we can collaborate and support each other, we should take advantage of those opportunities. Because there are times when the Sikh community also needs help.
Yeah.
We're all in this ship together.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to double up these questions here so we get through them all. What qualities do you think make a good public servant, and what advice do you have for Sikh Americans interested in getting involved in politics and policy?
The qualities that I think make for a good public servant are honesty, authenticity, and a fierce focus on advancing the public interest in a way that's mindful of the need to be efficient and professional. So, a basic competency is necessary. I also think that a good public official is someone who does as much listening or more listening to the public as talking or leading, and being able to acknowledge mistakes where you make them. Those are all kind of qualities that I think are important for public officials to have. For any Sikh who wants to go into office or consider running for elected office, my advice is to start small and play a game of long ball. I will tell you that I'm almost certain that every member of Congress at one time served as a councilman or a mayor or a assembly member. Too many times people in the Sikh community, when they decide to run for elected office, say I'm going to run for U.S. Senate, as their first foray into public office. What I did was I took a very hyper-local approach, and I ran for what's called Democratic Committee Person, which is literally representing the few blocks of your neighborhood,
right?
And getting to know, how the system works, getting to know, and developing the relationships you need to develop, and then seeing what opportunities present themselves. So that trajectory, I think, is one that takes years, probably decades, if you want to aspire to state or federal office. But the vast majority of people who are in federal office, really start small and make their way to higher levels where they have the ability to influence policies at a higher level.
Right. Final questions here. Why do you think it's important for our community to get involved in public service and politics? Because I think for a very long time there was a reluctance amongst the elders in our community to do that. I guess it was somewhat understandable because we were literally trying to financially establish ourselves. I think we both know that this is not a financially lucrative path, but it's a very fulfilling path, and it's very important. So now that we as a community have kind of reached that threshold, why do you think it's important for our next generation to do what you did?
Yeah, I think it's important because we want to be in control of our destiny as a community, and we want to be on the side of the table that's making decisions, not on the side of the table that's asking somebody to make a decision for us. Yeah. And in order to do that, you need to obtain power. Right. The way to obtain power is to one way to obtain power is to actually, roll up your sleeves and run for office. And by running for office as a Sikh, I'm acutely aware of the needs of the Sikh community, and I feel in a position to represent those needs, to the extent that I can. But unless we actually get off the sidelines, and it could be running for school board, it could be running for something very modest, but just or even volunteering for a campaign if running for office is not your thing, or as Attorney General very well has done, being a federal prosecutor and then having the opportunity to serve in his current capacity. We need to get to integrate into the public sector in order to have control over our future.
Last question for you, because I know you got to go. You're a busy man. What are your thoughts on the future of the United States, given our very turbulent political times? I was reading a poll on the way up here, and it was I think it was on the Washington Post. They're talking about that there's a significant number of Americans that are very pessimistic about the future on a number of fronts, economically and on the environment. People don't believe that our government is capable of dealing with these big problems. They're concerned about the deficit as well. So, what are your thoughts about the future, and then how do you think we can overcome this very divisive time?
I have concerns about the future, but in the spirit of Jardikala, I also have a high degree of optimism and faith in the sustainability of our institutions in terms of American institutions. I believe that the pendulum of history and politics swings in different directions over the course of our history, but some of the core values, our Supreme Court, the checks and balances that our founding fathers created in this system of governance have lasted and have been tested very hard during trying times in the course of our nation's history. So even though these are turbulent times, these are times of great concern, I have faith that Americans are able to control their own destiny because we are protected by these institutions that are inalienable, meaning that they come from, I believe, as a Sikh, from our Creator. So I don't think that they can be taken away from us, and if they are taken away from us, we've created a system of protections to seek redress. So I believe that, notwithstanding efforts to undermine those values, to undermine those institutions, that we will sustain, and get through these turbulent times with persistence and with faith in our values.
The last thing I'll say, and this is just a comment, I got involved in politics around the same time, and I have to say, just seeing you come up and has been something pretty special, because when I started We Were Six in 2014, or National Sikh Campaign 2014, and We Were Six in 2017. The intent was that hopefully we could foster an environment so that somebody like you would come through the ranks. And when I got involved in politics, it was because of Barack Obama, just like you did. I mean, obviously I'm much younger, so I couldn't run for office when I'm 18. That'd be a little weird. But I was hoping, as I sat in government buildings and offices and campaign offices, that one day that there would be somebody like you. I didn't know it happened this quickly, which is a pleasant surprise to me. But as someone that has been involved in public service, I think you've been a source of inspiration for myself, and I know that that is true for many people within our community around the world.
Well, thank you. That's deeply humbling. Yeah. Puts a heavy burden on me. Yeah. But that's okay. Yeah. I think everyone has to do their small part. Yeah. I don't think there should be an expectation of every Sikh to run for office or do one thing or another, but I think everybody should find their sweet spot, what they're comfortable with, in terms of contributing to society, trying to uplift people who are in need of help, and really advancing our values as Sikhs and as Americans.
Yep.
And there's so many ways to do that. Really, the sky in this country is the limit, and I think being a Sikh is only an asset to be successful as an American as well.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for your